Hi guys, you are on industrialization part 3. Congrats on finishing your first 2 videos. Remember that you are taking these notes thoroughly. Key terms seem to be kind of an issue for most of us. Those are terms that are bolded and underlined. These are signifiers that those are important to know. So keep that in mind as you get better and better at taking notes. So you should be turned to your guided note packet number 2. It says industrialization number 2 at the top. And we're going to start with section 4, the Great Migration. So let's chat about that. Section 4, the Great Migration. So before I tell you what it is, you kind of need to know the beginnings of it. So in the south of the U.S., a lot of the land is rural farmland. And remember, at this period in time, this is when we're seeing that shift from rural to urban. So when slavery was abolished, a lot of the slaves, or former slaves, stayed in the South and decided to work the land. They weren't really employable with any other skills or any other specific training because they weren't allowed to go to school, they weren't allowed to read or write. So farming was what was available for them to do once they were free. However, they weren't actually free because they were not paid well at all. So many of them were too poor to own their own land and their own farms. They did something called sharecropping, where they rented land and farmed it from a plantation owner. It's also known as economic slavery because they were paid such low wages that there was really no way that they could be successful or make any money. So another reason for this Great Migration, which we're going to talk about, is the intense amount of discrimination in the South. Here you can see 2 paintings done by an African-American man who is depicting the Great Migration. He says that for African-Americans there was no justice in Southern courts, and that there had always been discrimination, and there would always be discrimination. So now, what is this Great Migration? This Great Migration is 1 million, you can see here, 1 million African Americans moved from the south to the north of the United States. They were mostly moving to places, big cities like Chicago, Detroit, New York City, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus. So these are big industrial cities where those factories are popping up. So a lot of the reasons why they came was for jobs. So if we look at this map again, I kind of skipped over it before. If you look at this map again, you can see that the states with the greatest increase in population are like Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. And then you can see the blue states are the states with the greatest decrease in population. And then you can also see the arrows pointing upward. That's showing the African American migration to the north. So you see these southern states are decreasing in population, whereas these northern states where this industry is taking hold, and these new factories and these big cities are popping up, they're moving upwards towards those places. So here we go, we have the same painter here. Migrants arrived in the Chicago, the gateway to the west, in Pittsburgh, one of the great industrial centers of the north. So it's important to know that these people were moving from the south to the north primarily because of industrialization. So the Great Migration had positive aspects and it had negative aspects, like a lot of things that we've learned about during the Industrial Revolution. Some positive things is that moving to the north actually did improve black lives. They were given more rights to vote, to go to school. There were communities built, and a lot of African Americans were kind of released from that wage slavery, from that sharecropping that they had been a part of previously in the South. and there were so many jobs in the North. So even though there are improvements in Black lives, that does not mean that there is still segregation and discrimination even in the North. So, segregation and discrimination in the North. Housing was really hard for African Americans to find, specifically because they were discriminated against. However, the difference between discrimination in the North and discrimination in the South is, in the South, a lot of laws were imposed against specifically Black Americans in the way that they acted, in what they could do, and how they could interact with others, voting, education, etc. In the North, it was more of just custom, more of just culture, the way that people acted. So people were still just as racist in the North. There was still segregation in the North. So just because all of these positive things like voting and educational experiences and empowerment and community were available to these people, there were still these constant racist reminders that they couldn't live in the places that they'd like to. The places that they could find to live in were overcrowded. There was still discrimination, and the job positions that they were allowed to take were only unskilled labor positions. What's important to know about that is unskilled labor gets paid less than skilled labor. So ultimately, these African Americans are still facing this type of wage slavery that I was talking about with sharecropping, just kind of in a different environment. And I will remind you, our previous video, we saw this photograph of a KKK rally against immigrants, and the KKK was also very active in rallying against African American opportunities, and they weren't just present in the South, they were also very, very present in the North. So they were protesting African Americans taking jobs from what they saw white Americans deserved, and right along with the kind of rhetoric they had about the immigrants, that they didn't deserve what they were getting, and that the KKK was this kind of reaction against this migration of African Americans, as well as, like we talked about earlier, immigrants.